There's a question that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and it's this question. As a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, what is our responsibility in following the laws passed by our government? If you live in the United States, what is our responsibility as a follower of Jesus in following the laws passed by our federal government or our state level governments? What if those laws that they pass disagree with God's law? What is our responsibility in following them? If you live outside the USA and you're watching this question still applies to you. If you live in a country in the Middle East or a European nation, what happens when your government passes laws? If you're a follower of Jesus, what happens when they pass laws that disagree with God's law? Let's talk about that question. But first of all, my name is Hal Hall, and I am the founder and lead visionary of a ministry called the Great Awakening Church and Network. We're located in the Memphis area, just below the state line in Olive Branch, Mississippi. And you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. I'm Preacher Hal on Instagram. And we also have a Great Awakening Network Instagram page. And then I'm Pastor Hal Hall on YouTube. And so if you like this video, like, subscribe, share. And if you're on YouTube, hit the bell, and it will alert you when new videos are uploaded. And I try to put out new content at least once a week. So let's get back to this question. What happens if you're a follower of Jesus and our government, your government, wherever you may live, passes laws that disagrees with God's law? What is your responsibility in that? And so if you're a student of the Bible, you probably already know that I'm going to turn to Romans chapter 13 because Paul, the Apostle Paul, in writing to the church at Rome, kind of addresses this question. And so I'm just going to read 3 verses here in Romans chapter 13, and it says this. So Paul writes, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. But you want to be unafraid. But do you want to be unafraid of authority, the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. That's Romans chapter 13. Now, let me ask this question. Are there times when certain laws are passed that disagree with God's law, where we are not subject to the laws that they pass? Are there times, are there examples in Scripture that we can follow during those times? And the answer to that question is yes. There are times, I believe, when laws are passed that we must obey God's law over man's law. And let me give you this first example. And I'm going to give you several examples, but here's one. And so it's the example from the book of Exodus, the example of Moses. As you know, if you're familiar with the story of the Exodus, you'll know that a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. And Joseph, was sold into slavery in Egypt, and he went through a lot of junk, but eventually arose to be second in command, right? From the prison to the palace. And that's the sermon that we preached on Joseph of the Old Testament. And but Pharaoh, a king of Egypt, arose who did not know Joseph, and he began to be fearful because the Hebrews began to grow. And he was fearful that they would grow so much that they would join their enemies, and if they ever fought against them, then they would overtake them, defeat them. And so he passed a law that was a very immoral law, and that was to have all of the male children, babies that were born, killed. Now, the midwives did not obey that law. And so let's read a little bit about this in Exodus chapter 1. Let's see what happens here. This is Exodus chapter 1, verse 17. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children. So it literally says that they disobeyed the laws of the land. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them." Therefore, God dealt with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mightily. And so it was because the midwives feared God that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive." So what's going on there? So Pharaoh was fearful, so he passed laws to try to ensure that he and his the generations after him would have power. And so he passed laws so that the male children who would grow up to be military young men in the military would not overtake he or his government. And that was the whole sole purpose behind this murder, this atrocity that was going on. But the midwives did not obey him. And because the midwives did not obey, God blessed them. They disobeyed an immoral law, an atrocity that the ruler, the governing authority, was asking them to do. They disobeyed. God blessed them. But the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, went a step further and said, all of the male children that are born are to be thrown into the river. But you know the story of Moses, right? So when Moses was born, his mother put him in a basket, put him on the river, and Pharaoh's daughter found Moses in the basket. And Moses grew up in Pharaoh's household as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses grew up then, and God blessed Moses. He blessed him so much that he grew up to be the deliverer, and he delivered the Israelites out of 430 years of slavery, of bondage in Egypt, and eventually led them to the promised land. Now, there's a lot in that story, but here's the point, is that because they disobeyed, they disobeyed the laws of the land, the laws of the governing authority, because they disobeyed these immoral laws, God blessed them. Now, what is the last verse that we read in Romans chapter 13, verse 3? What did that say? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. Let's go back to the beginning. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Now, these rulers were doing evil. So my suggestion is this. We follow rulers who do good. We follow governing authorities who do good. But those rulers and leaders and government officials who do evil, we don't want to follow them, but we follow those who do good. And we are to be unafraid of those. And if we follow what is good, then we will have praise for doing what is good. And so there are other examples in the Bible about when laws are passed that are immoral, that go against God's law. And another particular example I'm thinking about is in the book of Daniel. Daniel, this is during the time of the Babylonian exile. And so at this time, for 70 years, Israel is in Babylon, exiled there. Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God blessed them because they put God above any kind of law that Nebuchadnezzar or Darius or any of the other Babylonian kings placed in front of them. They placed God's law always came first. And so God blessed them because of that. Now, the two biggest stories about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is Daniel in the lion's den and the fiery furnace. And so what was going on there? Laws were passed that went against God's law. For Daniel, in his part, laws were passed that if you prayed to any other entity other than the king, then you would be thrown into the lion's den. Well, Daniel's practice, and had been his since the beginning, was he opened his window and he prayed 3 times a day towards Jerusalem. His window faced Jerusalem, and he prayed. And these laws were passed specifically in order to catch Daniel doing something that was against the law, to get him thrown into the lion's den. Well, Daniel got caught and he was thrown into the lion's den. But as you know, the lions' mouths were shut and Daniel was spared because of that. And so God blessed Daniel because he followed God's law rather than man's law. Kind of the same thing with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were thrown into the fiery furnace because they followed God's law rather than man's law. But you know, there were just 3 men in the fiery furnace, but there were 4. Who was the 4th man in the fire? Well, theologians call that a Christophany. They believe that this was the appearance of a pre-incarnate Christ. So Jesus was with them in the fire. He was with them. And so when they came out of the fire, they didn't even have the hint of the smell of smoke on them. But not only that, but they also promoted them. The king himself, who threw them in there, promoted them. They got a promotion. So they were blessed by God and even blessed by the king because he realized that his law was not a good law and it went against the law of God. So they were blessed. And I think when we put God's law first above anything else, we follow that first. And what laws am I talking about? I'm talking about, well, the 10 Commandments for one. We need to follow the 10 Commandments, and we follow those, we'll be blessed. What about the New Testament? Do we follow those? We follow the teachings of Jesus, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, and we follow the other teachings of the Apostle Paul. We follow the example of Jesus. If we follow those, and when something is passed, a law that is passed, that disagrees or disagrees with God's law, then we always follow God's law first. I'm a follower of Jesus before I am a citizen of the USA. I love my country. Don't get me wrong. I am patriotic. I am red, white, and blue. And if you don't live in the USA, I hope that you love your country too. But I am a follower of Jesus before I am anything else. That is my number one priority. I want to please God above anything else. So I want to follow him first. And so when laws are passed that disagree or disobey with God's law, then I am going to follow God's law no matter what. And so a couple of different things that I want to talk about. And I want to talk about these real briefly because this is get into a very lengthy conversation. So the Apostle Paul talked about how no governing authority is placed there unless God ordains it, right? So there have been many evil leaders in the history of the world. I mean, we can even look in just the past 100 years or so in our world. We look at Hitler and Mao and Stalin, Pol Pot, Cambodia. We can look at all those people who just all kinds of evil atrocities that occurred under their leadership. So what are we to do? Did God place them in authority? And I struggle with that question. I really do. But here's the thing I want to talk about just real briefly here. Hitler in particular. So what about Germany prior to and during the rise of Hitler? And what about the German church? And it's been said, and I don't know how true this is, but it's been said that the German church sang louder when the Jews were placed on the trains and they were screaming and that kind of thing, knowing that they were going off to their death, and 6 million of Jews did in that country. So the German church was almost silent, except for a handful of people. And one of the people that we know about is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was not silent, and he eventually got thrown into jail, and he eventually was killed because of his opposition to Hitler, and even was accused of being in a plot to kill Hitler. So what about that? Well, I think that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was following God's law and the church was silent. And so when laws are passed in our day and our time that disagree and with God's law, then we are no better than the church in Germany during the rise of Hitler. And we cannot be silent any longer. We cannot be silent. We have to stand up and say, this is wrong. This goes against God's law. And we may receive the judgment of the government, but we're going to receive more. We're going to receive the judgment of the government if we stand up against it. But more than that, if we don't stand against it, we're going to be judged by history. We're going to be judged by God. And I don't want that to happen to the church, especially the church in America, but the church worldwide. We have to stand up even in the face of bad things, the government doing bad things to us. Now, I've heard reports of people in other nations besides the USA where pastors or church leaders stand up and all they do is read scripture, and they have been thrown into jail, thrown into prison because they are simply reading scripture but are accused of hate speech or some other kind of thing. And because of that, they are suffering the consequences in this life because of that. I don't want that to happen in my country, in the USA. I don't want that to happen. And so I believe that we have to vote for people that most closely align with a biblical worldview. When we don't, and we place other people that do not share the values of a biblical worldview, then we get ourselves into trouble. And I see that in our nation today, we are moving in a direction, and have been moving in a direction for a long time now, that where laws are being passed, where many unbiblical and unchristlike things are being passed and laws are being passed. So what am I talking about? Well, one thing, and let me briefly talk about this, is I am staunchly pro-life, unapologetically pro-life. And one of the reasons for that is not just because I believe that that is the biblical position, but I was adopted at 3 weeks old. And I am grateful that my birth mother chose not to have me aborted. Now, I was born before the Roe v. Wade decision, but she could have very easily gone and had me aborted, but she did not. And about 6 years ago now, I found out my birth mother's name. And and even before that, I prayed for her and thanked God that she made that decision not to have me aborted, and that I had an opportunity to live and to live my life. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope and pray that my life has affected other people, and I've had an impact on other people. And if I had not been born, that impact would not be there. My children would not be alive today. And on I could go. So I thank God for that, and I thank God for my adopted parents, and they are my parents. They raised me, and I appreciate that and love them. They're no longer with us. They're in heaven now, my mom and my dad, and I thank God for them and for adopting me and for the family that I grew up in, that I call my family. But I also thank God for my birth mother, that she made that choice to have me. So I believe that laws about abortion are wrong. They're murder. It's just like Moses, during the time of Moses, Pharaoh wanting to kill all of the male babies at that time, throw them in the river, kill them, get rid of them. I see that as no different than that. Killing the innocent, not allowing the innocent to live, is wrong. It's murder. And I think that we have to disobey. If that's the law of the land, then laws need to be passed where that is not the law of the land anymore. So I agree with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and I believe that we need to continue to do so. Now, and also about marriage. I believe that in biblical marriage, that marriage is between a man and a woman. And that's the only biblical marriage that there is. And so when laws are passed that say that two men can get married or two women can get married, or I think that's a slippery slope, and then it could lead to all kinds of combinations in marriage. And so because you look at where we were 20 years ago and where we are today, it's the whole idea about marriage and the whole LGBTQ question has totally changed and shifted in this nation. And so I believe that that marriage is between a man and a woman, and when anything beyond that is practiced or laws are passed, then we're going to have problems. And if you look in our world today and look at all the transgender nonsense that's been going on in the world today, it's madness. Mutilating children, or them taking hormones and this kind of thing that are totally destroying their lives, or their ability, or a girl wanting to transition to a man taking hormones and that kind of thing, or a boy wanting to become a girl taking hormones and having surgeries and these kinds of things. It totally destroys them. It's wrong, and I think it's evil. And we are all created in the image of God. We have that imago Dei, the image of God in us. And that is an attack on the image of God. And so we have to resist and disobey laws that the government passes concerning those kinds of things. We have to obey God's law over man's law. And so, when it comes to following, supporting, the laws of our land, I think we do when those laws agree with God's law. But when they begin to disagree with God's law, that's when we begin to be like the midwives, or we begin to be Daniels, and we begin to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's. The world needs more Daniels. The world needs more Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's. The world needs more Dietrich Bonhoeffers, who stand up in the face of evil and say, this is wrong. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to follow that. And this is wrong. And we need to stand up, and we need to say and speak up and say, this is wrong. I'm not going to follow this law. And I believe the government may not support us. The government may throw us into jail, but God will bless us because of that. So there's a lot of more that I could say about that, but I'm going to try to close this up, close this video up by this. Be a Daniel, be a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Be a midwife during the time of Moses. Be a midwife. Be someone that stands up for God's law, that stands up for truth, for righteousness, in the face of evil and the evil in this world today. If you do that, I believe God will bless you. And our responsibility is to God more than it is to man. May God bless you, and may you have a great rest of the day.